Well, that in the hydrogen laboratory, we have several research lines. We develop research on solid oxide fuel cells. We produce multifunctional anodes for solid oxide fuel cells. We also have developed a hydrogen diffusion barrier to be used on steels to protect against hydrogen embrittlement. We have developed several methods of hydrogen detection in materials, also materials for hydrogen storage, and we have also developed a hydrogen fuel cell bus, which will be available here outside for a ride after we finish here. Well, we are from the hydrogen laboratory at COPI. We have recently created the Brazilian Association for Hydrogen. And when we did it, I came here to the Science Park and talked to the director of the Science Park that we would be glad to bring to the companies that are installed here information about hydrogen energy to stimulate people from these research centers of different companies that are installed here to include the subject as a study subject in their research center and to begin to analyze it as something important for these companies. And I'd like to remind you that next year, on June next year, we're going to hold here in Rio de Janeiro the World Hydrogen Energy Conference. So it's a big conference dealing with hydrogen fuel cells and the energetic utilization of hydrogen. We might have more than 1,000 people in this conference from 60 different countries. So it will be very good if you can participate too.
This morning, my objective really is to inform you about some of the broader policy conversations that are going on in various countries and perspectives that they are taking on hydrogen and fuel cells, and then maybe talk about some examples of what's going on internationally and how that might dovetail with the thinking and the ideas that are going on here in Brazil. You will hear from a lot of people is the environmental objectives. It's climate change, GHG emission reductions, how do we manage that in our energy and transportation systems, in our industrial systems, but it's also local air quality. So a number of cities now, and I think in Brazil you have this conversation as well, where the air quality within city zones require action. This is kind of a snapshot of where we are now. Role of demonstrations. Demonstrations, as you had here in Brazil on the buses, are crucial in developing supply chain systems, understanding how the technology works, building highly qualified personnel, both in institutions like you have here and others where companies can work on a project and then draw on the highly qualified professionals to make the tweaks and the adjustments that are always necessary in developing new technologies and bringing them to market. The idea now is to really build the market, a focus on the market and what's the consumer need and the demand and the draw. And so that's what certain countries are really focusing on. And then the last point, and one I think that for a number of you would be the point of interest, is the dynamic, the role that hydrogen can play across the suite of sectors. So we think of it in the transportation sector, for vehicles, buses, and now it's coming to trains. but in fact, it's energy management systems, as we talked about earlier, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and energy storage. But it's also moving into the industrial space. So how does hydrogen, that's used in a lot of different industries, but how is it used in a clean way with other materials to work in the steel industry, the chemical industry, for example, and others? And so using hydrogen in a different way in these sectors is becoming a lot more of the conversation.
The IPHE is an organization where government representatives participate in it. How do you see today the action of governments towards hydrogen energy?
I think there's a recognition, a growing recognition of the role that hydrogen will play in clean energy, transportation, and industrial systems. And governments are looking at seeing how they can meet their industrial, their economic, and their environmental obligations. And they see hydrogen as playing a key role, along with electricity and other technologies, in meeting their obligations. And so they are looking at it favorably, and a number of countries are doing detailed analysis and understanding to see how best to facilitate the use of hydrogen and fuel cells in their economies.
Enquanto no mundo inteiro, em média, menos de 20% da energia consumida tem origem renovável, no Brasil esse número é igual ou superior a cerca de 45%. Quando não há demanda para toda a capacidade de produção das renováveis, a energia por elas produzida pode ser utilizada para produzir hidrogênio, que dessa forma armazena energia para uso futuro.
There are two aspects that link hydrogen to renewables. The first one is that, well, the main, you have two kinds of renewables. You have the renewables as biomass, geothermal, and reservoir hydropower. That it's okay. There are sources that you have, you can store the electricity, and then you don't need, let's say, don't have the problem of intermittency. But you have another group of renewables as wind, solar, and run-of-the-river hydropower plants, that then you have the problem of the intermittence. So the hydrogen is a very good way to, let's say, store electricity and face this problem of the intermittence.
Professor Tomaszkin, during your presentation here, you have showed some very interesting aspects of the Brazilian energy matrix related to renewables and the potential that we would have for hydrogen energy. Could you tell us more about it, please?
Sure. Brazil has one of the most renewable energy mix in the world, thanks to ethanol and hydro. But in the near future, we have new sources that are going to enter in our mix, as wind and solar energy, and in terms of bagasse too. So let's say Brazil has a huge advantage in terms of production of renewable energy. And Brazil could be a leader in terms of country that produce green hydrogen. So if there is a market in the world for green hydrogen, for clean hydrogen, Brazil has a very good condition to lead, to be a lead country.